Na.
Not.
Na.
Yatra.
Yatra.
Where?
Where?
Bhagam.
Bhagam.
Share.
Share.
Tava.
Tava.
Your.
Your.
Bhagina.
Bhagina.
Deserving to
Deserving.
deserving to take the share.
Deserving to take the share.
Dadu.
Dadu.
Did not give.
Did not give.
Guyajina.
Guyajina.
Bad priests.
Bad priests.
Yena.
Jena.
By the bestower.
By the bestower.
Makaha.
Makaha.
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice.
Niniyate.
Niyate.
Gets the result.
Gets the result.
Translation. By His Divine Grace, Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai.
My dear Lord Shiva, you are a shareholder of the portion of the sacrifice, and you are the giver of the result. The bad priests did not deliver your share, and therefore you destroyed everything, and the sacrifice remains unfinished. Now you can do the needful and take your rightful share. Text 51. Jivatad yajamano yam prapadyetakshini bhaga prego smashruni rohantu ushnotantascha purvavat. Translation. My dear Lord, by your mercy, the performer of the sacrifice, King Daksha, may get back his life, Bhaga may get back his eyes, Brighu his mustache, and Pusha his teeth. Text 52. Devanam Bhagnagatranam Ritvijam Chayudhasmabhi Bhavatanu Grihitam Nam Ashu Manyoshtu Anaturam. O Lord Shiva, may the demigods and the priests whose limbs have been broken by your soldiers recover from the injuries by your grace. And finally, text 53. Esha te rudra bhagoshtu yad uchishto dvarasya vai yagyashche te rudra bhagena kulpatam adya yagyahan. Translation. O destroyer of the sacrifice, please take your portion of the sacrifice and let the sacrifice be completed by your grace. Purport. A sacrifice is a ceremony performed to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 2nd chapter, it is stated that everyone should try to understand whether the Supreme Personality of Godhead is satisfied by his activity. In other words, the aim of our activities should be to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just as in an office it is the duty of the worker to see that the proprietor or the master is satisfied, so everyone's duty is to see whether the Supreme Personality of Godhead is satisfied by one's activity. Activities to satisfy the Supreme Godhead are prescribed in the Vedic literature, and execution of such activities is called yajna. In other words, acting on behalf of the Supreme Lord is called yajna. One should know very well that any activity besides yajna is the cause of material bondage. It is explained in Bhagavad Gita 3.9, Yagyarta kamanomi atra lokoyam karma bandhana. Karma bandhana means that if we do not work for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord Vishnu, then the reaction of our work will bind us. One should not work for his own sense gratification. Everyone should work for the satisfaction of God. That is called yajna. After the yajna was performed by Daksha, all the demigods expected prasad, the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Vishnu. Lord Shiva is one of the demigods, so naturally he also expected his share of the prasad from the yajna. But Daksha, out of his envy of Lord Shiva, neither invited Shiva to participate in the yajna, nor gave him his share of the offering. But after the destruction of the yajna arena by the followers of Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma pacified him and assured him that he would get his share of prasad. Thus he was requested to rectify whatever destruction was caused by his followers. In the Bhagavad Gita 3.11 it is said that all the demigods are satisfied when one performs yajna. Because the demigods expect prasad from yajnas, yajna must be performed. Those who engage in sense gratificatory, materialistic activities must perform yajna, otherwise they will be implicated. Thus Daksha, being the father of mankind, was performing yajna, and Lord Shiva expected his share. But since Shiva was not invited, there was trouble. By the mediation of Lord Brahma, however, everything was settled satisfactorily. The performance of yajna is a very difficult task because all the demigods must be invited to participate in the yajna. In this Kali Yuga, it is not possible to perform such costly sacrifices, nor is it possible to invite the demigods to participate. Therefore, in this age, it is recommended Jagyai Sankirtana Praya Yajanti Hi Samedasaha from Srimad Bhagavatam 11.5.32. Those who are intelligent should know that in the Kali Yuga there is no possibility of performing the Vedic sacrifices, but unless one pleases the demigods, there will be no regulated seasonal activities or rainfall. Everything is controlled by the demigods under the circumstances in this age in order to keep the balance of social peace and prosperity. All the intelligent men should execute the performance of the Sankirtan Yajna by chanting the holy names Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Hare. One should invite people, chant Hare Krishna, and then distribute prasadam. This yajna will satisfy all the demigods, and thus there will be peace and prosperity in the world. Another difficulty in performing the Vedic rituals is that if one fails to satisfy even one demigod out of the many hundreds of thousands of demigods, just as Daksha failed to satisfy Lord Shiva, there will be disaster. But in this age, the performance of sacrifice has been simplified. One can chant Hare Krishna, and by pleasing Krishna, one can satisfy all the demigods automatically. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 4th canto, 6th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Brahma Satisfies Lord Shiva. Yes, so we understand that culture means the premises which are cherished in a society from generation to generation. Premise means the basic principles on which all our actions are based. So this Western European civilization is based on principles which are preserved in literature, in great books. Actually, this in our world today, this is the where culture is preserved, in literature. There are, of course, many aspects of culture. Culture means everything that goes on ultimately in human society that is indicative of the culture, but culture is preserved generation by down the generations in books, in literature. And now we see today that the younger generation, that they no longer care for these great literatures of the past, the classics. So therefore, this civilization is losing its culture. It's degenerating. Yesterday I was reading, they got me these magazines, so in one of those magazines there was an article about a young woman in her early 20s. So she's some, I suppose, representative of the new generation. So it was about her favorite activity, her own culture, which was to ride a mountain bike in races. It's like downhill mountain races. So they ride down the hill at more than 100 kilometers per hour on a bicycle. And this girl was describing how many times she fell off her bike and broke her arm and leg and pelvis and shoulder. But she's very, cultured in the sense that she's always enthusiastic to ride again. So when she breaks an arm or leg, she goes in the hospital, gets it. She was talking like this. Because I'm very determined, so that my body heals as fast as possible, and then I get back on the bike, go down the hill again. And she's wearing around her neck all the time she has a stuffed piranha fish, because she should be always aggressive. So she wears this around her neck. And she also carries with her the ashes of a pet dog she had, which died, and then she actually baked it in the oven till it became ashes. And before she rides her bike, when she's on the top of the mountain, she takes some ashes and sprinkles it on her head for good luck. So this is modern culture. This is where our world is headed. And this is because these, of course, so-called great ideas or great premises of the past are now being forgotten. Because the young people today, they're no longer interested in what, let's say, what Socrates or Plato had to say, or what is in the collected works of Shakespeare, or all whatever these great books are. Nobody's interested. If they read it all, they read Batman comic books and things like that. And so therefore, we come to such a point. And if it continues, then how can civilization go on? How is it possible? Imagine what her children will be like. She's wearing piranha fish around her neck. So what would her children be like? That we cannot imagine yet. So, this Brahma sampradaya, Prabhupada said, the wealth of this sampradaya is in its literature and in its books. Brahma is speaking here, and everything Brahma speaks is literature, is Veda. And that which he speaks is the basis of Vedic civilization. The Bhagavad Gita states, Sahaj Yagya Praja Shrishtra Puro Vacha Prajapati. So at the time of creation, Lord Brahma gave yagya. How did he give it? Puro Vacha. He spoke. He gave it in the form of Veda. So everyone then is anena prashavishyadvam yo ishta, so esha kamaduk, yes. So kamaduk. So everyone is expected to follow this Vedic sacrifice as a culture, and by doing this, then everyone, kamaduk means everyone's desire will be satisfied. That is a whole point of culture in any society, is that it is the means by which we can be happy. It is considered to be the proper mode of behavior, proper mode of thought, and by acting according to the principles of culture, then we are all to be happy in life. So our culture, as I've been saying in the last few days, is sacrifice, and that is guaranteed in Bhagavad Gita. That if you practice sacrifice, then all your desires will be satisfied, up to Brahma's own desire. So we have our desires. Generally, the people in this world, of course, their desires are materialistic. But in order to satisfy these desires properly, there is the Vedic culture of sacrifice given. And behind that culture, given by Brahma, is his desire. And his desire is that, this is specifically explained in Srimad Bhagavatam, his desire is that everyone become a devotee of the Lord. So this is the wonderful thing about Vedic culture. that if you follow it, then sooner or later you become a devotee of the Lord. And you become trained. This training in performing sacrifice, just as it's described here. A sacrifice is a ceremony performed to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So actually the sacrificial culture is Krishna's own culture. In this spiritual world, we see in Goloka Vrindavan, we see the ultimate perfection of sacrifice. In that Lord Krishna, he is offering himself to his devotees, and his devotees are offering themselves to Krishna. It is a mutual act of offering. And so this wonderful relationship, this giving, even the Lord is giving himself to his devotees. His devotees are giving themselves to the Lord. So that is represented or reproduced in the form of Vedic sacrifice, which is to be performed by everyone in human society. Whether, they may not in the beginning understand the full meaning of sacrifice. Lord Brahma's own intention, that this is the culture of devotees. So they may not understand that. They may perform sacrifice with their own particular interests in mind. But by doing that, by entering into this culture, by becoming cultured themselves, then gradually they become devotees of the Lord. So this is the scheme of Vedic sacrifice. And this culture, which, as I said, culture means the premises of civilization, which are cherished from generation to generation, handed down. And this is specifically said in this verse from Bhagavad Gita 3.10, that Sahajagya Prajashrishtra Purovacha Prajapati, that at the time of creation, when Brahma sent forth generations of men and demigods, he gave them this yajna to cherish, to hand down. So this is all given and preserved in the Vedic literature. And our sampradaya, Srila Prabhupada said, this Brahma sampradaya, its wealth, its particular glory is in books. There are 4 Vaishnava sampradayas. So each sampradaya is, known for something. Like Prabhupada said, the Lakshmi sampradaya is known for its wealth because it comes from Lakshmi Devi. So if you ever have the chance to go to South India and visit the famous temples of the Lakshmi or Sri Sampradaya, you'll see they're very grand temples, very, very opulent. The Sri Rangam temple especially is the largest temple in India. It's a huge, it's practically a city, a town in itself. It has 7 walls, and people live within the walls, and all the functions of a society, of a city, are carried out within the walls of the Sri Rangam temple. And the temple complex in the inner part is just huge, amazing. So that is the outstanding feature of that sampradaya, its opulence by the grace of Goddess Lakshmi. So our sampradaya is the Brahma sampradaya, and Brahma is the giver of the Vedas. So the opulence of this sampradaya is books, literature. So the cherished ideals, premises of our culture are, of course, Srila Prabhupada's books. But it shouldn't stop there. One Mataji was asking yesterday, how is this culture to be handed down? So I thought about that. And it has to be handed down by churning Srila Prabhupada's books. Actually, culture in Vedic society, it very much depends upon the Brahmanas. Brahmanas are the preservers of culture because they are the knowers of the Vedas. And the specific quality of a Brahmana that sets him apart from the other classes is not what family he was born in. Is also not how he dresses or, his special aristocratic position in society. But actually, the specific special quality of a Brahmana is that he makes this culture of sacrifice real to all people at all levels. They're the Kshatriyas. Now the Kshatriyas, we were talking the other day about bureaucracy. That's their tendency. They're very pragmatic people. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord speaks of 4 classes of men who are attracted to serve Krishna for different reasons. So Shudras, actually Shudra means one who laments. So they're in distress. So they take shelter of the Lord out of distress, just to be relieved of distress. Vaishya obviously is interested in making money. So that is why he comes to the Lord. And then there's the class of men, Jigyashu, who are curious. So that's the Kshatriya. They're intelligent, but curiosity is different from Jnani, from one who actually wants knowledge, who wants to become situated in knowledge. Curious person, he also wants knowledge, but for particular ends. He's got a list of questions. He wants them answered, and then that's it. Then I just go act on those answers, and I don't have time to get more absorbed in all this knowledge. Just give me the answers to my questions. That's a Kshatriya. So their tendency is to be pragmatic. So pragmatic means practice, which is, this is required, this is necessary, because just knowledge without practice is also, at least from a social point of view, pretty useless. There's this expression, ivory tower intellectuals. So on the ivory tower, there are the intellectuals gazing off into the heavens and thinking this and thinking that. And the people down below, if they don't have guidance, then they will become just a herd of animals. So that knowledge has to be transferred to the mass of people, and that is what the Kshatriyas are there for. So they extract the practical essence of knowledge and make sure it is implemented in society. So that is very much required. But society cannot simply be based on pragmatism alone, because there's no depth to it. There's no depth to it. The culture is deep. The culture is actually deep. The culture is, yes, it is invested in the great sages, and they can explain, because on the pragmatic level there are always problems. Bhagavatam is full of this. Bhagavatam is full of just like this very difficulty here in the sacrifice of Daksha. They wanted to, they knew what to do. They knew how to perform a sacrifice. But why? That's a question of culture. Culture is why. Why? Why to satisfy the Supreme Lord? So if out of enviousness the Lord Shiva is cut out of the sacrifice, that is not going to satisfy Krishna, because Lord Shiva is his dearmost devotee. Among the demigods, there's no greater devotee than Lord Shiva. So if Daksha, out of enviousness, this really petty, mundane, family kind of enviousness, village enviousness. If he, thinking of Lord Shiva as his son-in-law, and my son-in-law has disrespected me, so therefore don't let him have the share of sacrifice, then that is certainly displeasing to the Supreme Lord, and therefore this great catastrophe happened. And it happened because Lord Krishna himself was displeased by this sacrifice. So they lost the thread of why. They knew how to perform. There were expert Brahmins there. They knew what offerings to make, what mantras to chant, all that stuff, mantra, tantra stuff. But why? They lost. So, and that was all because they came under the influence of Daksha. And Daksha, these Prajapatis, they're in the classification, and there's also hierarchy among the demigods, Varnashram hierarchy. And so the Prajapatis are in the classification of Kshatriya. They're rulers over mankind. So when the Kshatriyas finger snapping exercises, new yoga. So when the Kshatriyas become over prominent and begin to act as Brahmanas by telling everyone what to do, giving the culture themselves, then the depth of the culture is lost. People act pragmatically just to get things done, immediate needs done, and that's it. And then that is no longer pleasing to the Supreme Lord. And that culture will then go downhill, degrade. So culture, therefore my point is, culture is preserved in the Vedic literature, and the Brahmanas are set apart from everyone else because they know this Vedic literature, they know how to explain it. Brahmana knows how to explain the Vedic literature in such a way to make it real, to make it relevant to everyone. Vedic yajna is Krishna himself. Krishna himself. So to make yajna real means to make that connection manifest at all levels of society. The Shudras, Vaishyas, Kshatriyas, and certainly Brahmanas. All of them should see directly how their activities are connected to Krishna. They should be realizing Krishna through their activities. If our activities are meant to satisfy Krishna, then we should know that if we're actually satisfying Krishna, there will be reciprocation. And one experiences that reciprocation in well-being, sattvic well-being, that one is satisfied within, and one's activities are satisfying all living entities without. And thus, Vedic society is peaceful, is harmonious, promotes universal well-being, curbs down the selfishness of the individual, and ultimately the whole thing, the whole arrangement of this Vedic culture is pleasing to the Supreme Lord, and He showers His blessings upon everyone. I'll stop here. Are there any questions? Yes.
So in this sacrifice, Daksha, he got this reaction quite immediately from his offense. Then we have this verse, Taten Kampan Samikshimana, that the devotee's attitude is he gets adverse reaction. He will take this as Krishna's mercy and surrender more.
Yes.
So in this case, it's very obvious that where the reaction is coming from, and he is aware of that. But the question is it always that Krishna distributes such reactions in connection with a very recent offense, or could it also be that this distributing reactions for purification can be from, to purify mentalities which are from very far away also, and you cannot detect what is actually, because sometimes what is that wilder.
Yes. It is not that we can suppose that everything that happens to us we should be able to trace back to some specific beginning, some specific offense on our part. This is the same, actually, this interest you've expressed. Sometimes you hear this question that how does the cycle of reincarnation make any sense, actually, if it is to reform us, but then we can't remember what we did in our past life, and we're suffering in this life, so how do we learn anything from it? But that's not the point. The point is not that by our own experience we are to learn things. What do we learn? Or what is learning? That is learning from the Guru Parampara, from learning Vedic knowledge. We are in a predicament in this material world. We are suffering. That is a fact. Now, to learn why and how this suffering has come upon us, we must turn to the spiritual master. We must turn to the Vedic literatures and understand these things through his eyes. That's the Avaroha Panta, descending knowledge. This other process you're indicating is, again, it's inductive, it's ascending. That I'll see it for myself. That I'll somehow figure it out. Why I'm suffering now at this moment because of something. No, this is a recipe for remaining endlessly in the material world as some kind of karmic Sherlock Holmes, trying to trace out all the reactions with his magnifying glass. Where did this come from? And there's no end to it. There's no end to it. And then while we do that, we're making at every moment more reactions. So, because that process is not approved. That process will not help us. It will not relieve us from our sinful activities. Even you can figure it out. You see, yourself. That's the thing. This inductive process of knowledge, because it is not pleasing to the Supreme Lord. Only He can deliver us. That knowledge that He gives from within the heart is liberating. The knowledge that we figure out for ourselves is not liberating. So even, by this process you can expect to get the wrong answer anyway, but if somehow or other you stumble upon the right answer in some instance, it still won't help you. Even if you can, there's this famous cult, Scientology, and that's what they're doing. They lay something like a esoteric psychology or psychoanalysis type thing, where they lay down and grab onto some electronic sensor which detects something like a lie detector. Same principle. And then there's what they call an auditor who asks these questions, and then they're supposed to, they go into some kind of memory state, and they remember even in past lifetimes the cause of some problem they have now. Say they have some twitch in the eye, and then they go back 100 lifetimes. They some crazy memory will be there that explains the twitch of the eye. And then when they relive this so-called memory, then they're supposed to be freed from that problem. Then the twitch goes away. And so this way you trace out every particular idiosyncrasy you have. And then in the end you become, they have these different grades, like liberated souls. This is complete rubbish. And the whole process is a hallucination. The memories they relieve are just hallucinatory. They're not factual. There's this regressive therapy, which is in this cult, but in many other forms too. There's many forms of this same thing, regressive hypnotherapy. So they take you back, first in this lifetime, the previous lifetime. But this is all dreaming, just a form of dreaming. Suggestion. The therapist is placing us in a state of mind where we become very, very susceptible to suggestion. This is called a dissociative state. It's like when one is hypnotized or one is on the border between waking and sleeping. Dissociative state. Or another thing is that the people who are attracted to this type of thing, they're already in a dissociative state because they're very imaginative, very spaced out people. So they're already prone, to seeing UFOs, things like that. So, they very easily conjure up these memories, which are just creations of the mind. And this has been shown. There's many instances of this in modern times, because sometimes court cases come out of such memories. The suggestion, there's many instances of this, is at the suggestion of some therapist, he starts to suggest, did something bad happen to you when you were a little girl, and then she starts to think, and then they're just, because the mind is such a sewer. So then something is created in the mind where she remembers that daddy did something bad with her when she was 3 years old. And this memory comes into her mind very, very clearly. And then she's crying, oh daddy. And then when she comes out of it, then she makes a court case against her father for molesting her. And her father's shocked. What happened to my dog? But then when these things are investigated, at first they were very much accepted in the court, because there's child molestation is a big issue today. So some years ago, in the 80s, when all this stuff started, this phenomenon, then it was accepted because it was a psychologist who was her therapist, and saying, yes, I treated her. We went back in her life by this regressive therapy, and she remembered these bad things that happened to her. So it was accepted, and then fathers and uncles and people like that were being sent to prison for 20 years. And then later on they started to discover, in so many cases, these are false memories. They started to investigate and find out why such things could have not happened. When they placed the memory, where were you? When was this when this happened? And then they fixed the time frame. And when they looked back in history, they found out this little girl was vacationing with her grandparents. She was 300 miles away from that person, and it's not possible we could have molested her. And so many things like that. So anyway, the mind is unlimitedly creative. There are three, just like there are three modes of nature, there are three modes of mental activity, three modes of thought, which are reflective, creative, and critical. So reflective thought is wonder, looking at the world with wonder. And then from wonder, questions come, and these questions have to be answered, and then that's the next phase, the passionate phase of thought, which is creative. So the mind is unlimitedly creative. So once you give the mind its ticket to create, put the patient on the couch, and put him in a dissociative state, and give him suggestions, then he can create all kinds of things. So this is the so-called regressive therapy, and all these memories are just creations of the mind. So my point is that the process is completely bogus anyway. And then, by reliving all these so-called memories, where's the liberation? Where's the question of liberation? Because liberation actually means to become liberated from anarthas, from unwanted habits, and that's not happening. So this whole process is bogus. So the actual process is, yes, you're suffering. So like Sanatana Goswami, you should ask why from authority. And he will tell you. And not necessarily, he doesn't have to tell you, yeah, you got this funny arm because, 500 lifetimes ago you beat a cow or something before now. Your arm doesn't work. But he'll tell you that you're in Maya, and that's why you're suffering. That's all we need to understand. And you see, the karmic reactions are compared to the breezes, which the body is compared to a boat. The karmic reactions are compared to the breezes, favorable and unfavorable, which blow on this boat. And the spiritual master, he's the captain of the boat, so he knows how to set the sail, to catch these breezes in such a way to push the boat across the water of birth and death, the ocean of birth and death, to the other side. So that's what's important. Not to trace every reaction back to... That's... you can sit in this material world forever doing that. But the thing is that these reactions are to be engaged in Krishna's service. Good and bad. Good reactions you engage positively. Bad reactions means that you understand I'm very, very sinful, and whatever bad reactions I'm getting, these are being minimized by the Supreme Lord to make me serious. You see, so the spiritual master engages both. If something bad happens, he tells you, see what a rascal you are? Now you should become serious. And good things means our talents, our abilities, our intelligence. That you should engage in Krishna's service to the fullest extent. So that is what's going to liberate us. That's what's going to get us across the ocean of birth and death. Not just sitting here and recounting all the bad things we did, tabulating them up, making... That's what they do in Scientology. They make a whole big list. When you were an Egyptian and you were building the pyramids and you dropped a stone on your foot. That's why now you walk funny. And it's all nonsense anyway. Yes.
So the same trap is there if you have a not adverse situation, but the opposite, like flourishing and opulence and and then you think, oh, I deserve because I did. It's the same trap.
Yes. Yes, exactly. These things that the real thing is to engage them in devotional service. Karma means our activity, whether our activity is fashioned by good or bad reactions, but here we are. So then that has to be engaged in Krishna's service. That is done in the direction of Vedic scriptures and spiritual masters. Okay, any other things? Yes?
Sometimes actually suffering because one experiences one's anger and unwillingness to surrender to Krishna. Is it also possible to see it as Krishna's mercy, or how to engage it positively, or is it just because one is doing something wrong that's why one is experiencing that?
What are you saying? To engage your unwillingness to surrender to Krishna? You have to give that up. That is not karma. That's actually the attitude of the living entity himself. That's the cause of karma. That's the cause of our being here in the material world. That's the false ego. So the false ego is removed by surrendering to the direction of the spiritual master. So that's what you have to do to overcome that. Once you do that, then there's no false ego. And until you do that, there's false ego. Then it will give you trouble. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Suhotra Swami ki jai.